Shields up, Ironbreakers. How's everybody doing? Today, I'm bringing you a bit of a different kind of live stream. And that is because I was like, oh man, I haven't watched the latest Q&A about World of Warcraft. I've been playing a ton of World of Warcraft, so I figured, you know what, I should check out the Q&A. And as I was starting to watch it, I was like, you know what, I could actually talk about several points that are being made in this Q&A. So I only watched the first couple of minutes. I didn't really watch all that much of it. And I figured, you know, let's just do it live. Fuck it. We'll do it live. And we'll talk about all of this stuff live. So I got the Q&A right here, queued up and ready to go. And I've even heard from Mr. Soul Creek in a comment on my previous video where I talked about how protection warriors are completely not viable in the game right now if you're trying to do any kind of progression content. Like, sure, you can bring them along, but you're going to be a hindrance to your team. If you, if you were to bring another tank, it would be a lot easier for everybody else, is what I'm getting at. You know, there's no situation where they actually excel. And that is a problem that I have. And the other problem that I have is the way that loot works in the game right now. It is completely crazy. It is completely insane. And to top it off, Blizzard expects you to grind 3 different sets of gear for each character so that you have different sets for whatever role you happen to be performing. And I want to make sure that people understand that the reason that I'm, you know, delivering this criticism to the game is because I haven't played the game in a long time before this expansion. And I'm getting back into it. And I'm really enjoying it. Like, I'm genuinely really enjoying my time with the game from gameplay standpoint, from Mythic pluses and raiding and hanging out with friends. And it's just been really fun. And that's where this criticism comes from, because I'm enjoying the experience so much. I want it to be better for everybody else. I want it to be better for myself as well, naturally, because I feel that there's a couple of flaws that can be addressed. But I'm not, you know, I'm not hating on World of Warcraft for the sake of hating on World of Warcraft. I wouldn't even say that I'm hating on it. I'm just bringing forth some criticism. But anyways, let's get started. Avatrum, Goldfish, Miss Soul Creek, thank you very much for showing up and chatting it up. But let's get started, and I will try to address the stuff that you guys come up with live. As a matter of fact, I was thinking if I should do callers on Discord, but I might do that after the stream. I don't know. We'll see. Either way, let's get this party started.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to another World of Warcraft live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen. Joining me, as usual, game director Ian Hazekostas. Ian,
great to be here as always.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
How's it going? So we have a ton of questions that came in. We're going to start off with a few questions about everyone's favorite recent topic, which is Azurite armor. I know we've been saying a lot about Azurite armor recently, but just getting some clarifications out here would probably be good.
Sure.
So let's get into it. First question comes from Azamain, who asked, during the last update on Azurite armor, you mentioned adding another ring with spec-specific traits only. Will items be set up so that the same trait doesn't appear more than once between the 2 rings? So we posted recently that the new Azurite gear being added in Tides of Vengeance will have a 5th ring on the outer edge.
Exactly. Yes, from the Battle of the Zara lore and the subsequent Season 2 gear from Dungeons and PvP. So yes, there's an extra outer ring that has 2 spec-specific Azurite traits per spec. So that's up to 8 unique traits if you are
2 Azurite traits per spec. Up to 8 traits if you're a druid, 6 traits for most other classes, 4 traits if you're a demon hunter.
A druid with 4 specs, 4 if you're a demon hunter, 6 for most people. And no, those will always be different than the single spec specific trait on what is currently the outer ring. So effectively, you're going to have access to 3 different traits out of 6 or 7 total available. This will triple the availability of any given trait. So if you've been looking for, I just really want at least 1 point in this thing that increases the radius of my healing rain or increases the uptime of Demo Shout on my Prot Warrior or whatever.
Oh, wait a minute. So these are not new traits, because I was just like, wait a minute, what the hell are you doing? You're gonna make it worse. Stop. But no, what you're saying is that they're bringing in I'm assuming the same traits, maybe a couple of new ones here and there, but mostly the same traits so that you get more traits available to you. It's actually an ingenious solution for the problem, but it doesn't address the problem of like the costing of reforging Azurite gear. The problem of me not wanting to farm 3 different sets for the same character. Wonder if they bring that up.
And you've been pigeonholed into just 1 or 2, items that you can seek out, you'll have 3 times as many options, as well as always picking up and opening up, any new Azurite armor that you get with a meaningful choice between 2 spec-specific traits as you go from there.
Okay. It's only the spec-specific traits that are on the outside? It's not the generic, like, dagger in the back and so on?
Exactly. Those. So basically, just imagine the current pieces that you're seeing that have, 3 rings in the central node. And those will stay the same. So if there's a piece from a dungeon, that will still have that exact set that you're accustomed to seeing, or from emissaries or whatever. But in Season 2, and then all the new gear from Dazara Lore is being built to have a new outer ring around it. So it's going to be this 5th outer ring that has between 4 and 8 traits, depending on your class, and only spec-specific ones. So no generics.
Okay. Cool. So that also means that there's no, just to clarify the sort of intent behind the question here, there's no doubling up on the same trait inside any given piece.
You'll be able to get up to 3 stacks at most if you have the same trait on all 3 of your slots. That'll still be the case, except now getting 3 stacks of the same trait pretty much means that's all you're doing with all of your Azurite gear. Whereas here, you'd still have 3 more trait selections to complement those, whether it's going to stack 3 of a different one or spreading it more evenly to get a single point in a few different ones that don't have stacking components, so you can get some different utility enhancements. Again, the goal here is just
this actually looks like a good idea.
More access to different traits that you
opinion.
want, and more choices.
Cool. Next question came from War, who's we're still talking about Azurite here, who said, would you consider changing the Azurite system to have traits saved spec-based versus item-based? Having 1 set of 380 shoulders is so frustrating to balance between specs that I avoid other content due to reforging.
This right here is one of my major problems with Azurite gear. Just like straight up, one of the biggest problems, I mean, sure, there's the availability issue of Azurite gear, right? But one of the main reasons why the availability of Azurite gear is such a big problem is because Blizzard expects you to get 3 different pieces for your 3 different specs, or 4 different specs if you're a druid, or 2 different specs if you're a demon hunter. And it's just like, this solves it. This solves it. Look at this. This question solves the problem. It's just like, look, I swap from Protection to Fury, or I swap from Brewmaster to Mistweaver, and I get a different set of traits. Why is that so hard? Let's find out.
This has been one of the more common suggestions we've seen, similar to tier gear, how in previous expansions your tier set pieces, the set bonuses would change based on what spec you were, asking to do the same thing for Azurite armor.
Yeah, so I think set pieces in past expansions were kind of an exception to the standard rules when it comes to items. And the reason why we went down that road was it felt a little odd to literally get the exact same, you need 2 of the same item from the same boss with the same art, with the same name, just to cover both balance and resto or balance and feral. And so having it be a single piece that could change made sense in that context. But that was an exception to the normal standard, where a key difference between character-based things, which can be smoothly and seamlessly changed, and item-based things is that items are a bit more firm, a bit more static. This is, if you look at how most items work, whether you have a one-hand weapon and a shield for your prot spec, but you need a 2-hander to play arms, or you get a specific trinket based on your loot spec that is for healing or otherwise, if you want to play another spec, you generally want to seek out another item in that slot. Similarly, but then there are also some generic ones. If you have a trinket that is just...
So wait a minute. A couple of expansions ago, you came up with a brilliant system, in my opinion, which was, I have this plate piece right here, right? This plate piece will give you strength. So say, for instance, a set of plate legs. This will give you strength if you're a warrior, and this will give you strength if you're a protection paladin. But when you swap specs to holy, if you're a holy paladin, you swap specs to holy, this piece of gear now gives you intellect. I thought that was fucking brilliant. That is still in the game, by the way. A lot of pieces still work this way. So this directly contradicts what you are saying, because what he's saying right now is he's going up and saying, well, I mean, we expect you to go get another piece of gear. And why? You already have these pieces of gear in the game that are extremely flexible. So why would you want us to go get another piece of gear in order to... It just confuses me because it seems to go against something that was made, you know, that there was a choice made a while back. I think it might have been during Wrath of the Lich King when this was first announced. It was a long time ago, so I don't know. But that's when I remember it being implemented to have plate pieces that would have strength and intellect. And as such, you have the same thing for certain leather pieces. As a matter of fact, most leather pieces give you agility and intellect so that you can freely swap between different specs, and the gear itself adjusts to your spec. You know, it might not have the best stats, the best secondary stats, but again, if it's your off spec, you really don't care that much about it. Sure, eventually you'll want to optimize it and seek out a different piece of gear, but ultimately it's still viable. Whereas with the Azurite traits, it's not. Like, last night I had to swap for healing, and I still haven't gotten an additional headpiece so that I can have like healing traits on my headpiece. So I was basically healing with a tanking headpiece, and it just doesn't make any sense because I couldn't even reforge because I've been, you know, fine-tuning and reforging and experimenting. So my reforging costs right now are above 600 gold, and I'm not that rich. As a matter of fact, last night in the middle of my raid, I literally had to ask my raid leader, dude, can I have some gold? Because I legit just don't have gold to fucking repair myself. That's how bad it was. So it's just like, you know, it doesn't make sense. You either go all the way in one direction or you go all the way in the other direction. And I'm almost scared of saying this because now I almost feel like Blizzard might watch this and be like, you know what? That guy has a point. Fuck all this loot being like, you know, this loot being usable by multiple specs. No, forget all that. From now on, single spec, single loot, that's what you get. You asked for it. You know, I hope that's not what they do.
Primary proc secondary or secondary proc primary, that might work for both. And so I think that was...
And a very good point by Avatrum. It's not the same thing because you can't actually farm Azurite gear in Mythic... Azurite gear in Mythic Plus, whereas you can farm other things like trinkets, weapons, armor pieces that are not Azurite infused.
That's sort of our default posture with these items. Now, in many ways, Azurite armor is more flexible than a default item, where, you know, if I've collected a full set of tank gear and I want to start DPSing because my raid doesn't need an extra tank anymore, I now can't do that without going out and collecting a whole new set of gear.
Lies! I can DPS with the exact same gear that I tank with. As a matter of fact, if you're a warrior, the stats are almost the same. Because warriors right now really benefit from haste, whether you're protection or fury. Haste is a fucking fantastic stat. So therefore, the same stats that you have, at least in the warrior side of things, like, you know, different classes might vary around, but even as a brewmaster monk, most of the stats that I have as a tank, I can use those as a windwalker, and it's fine. You don't need to get a whole new set of gear in order to swap from tanking to DPSing. As a matter of fact, I think tanking to DPSing is a terrible example. Like, if you want to give an even better example, you should have gone, oh, if I need a heal, then you do have to swap quite a bit of gear. But even then, it's not that much. It's probably just the trinkets. Come on, Ian. You can do better than this.
Here, the fact that you can change the spec, you know, the traits that you've chosen, adds a lot more flexibility. You know, if
it doesn't.
If, you know, one of your tanks is going to be out for a couple of weeks, and
no.
you need to jump in and tank for your raid, you can just spend a few dozen gold if you haven't been respecking much, and shift all of your Azurite pieces over to cover that. Or if you're going back and forth regularly between two specs, I think generic traits are also there as an option for that purpose.
Dude, you really want to bring up generic traits? You want to bring up generic traits? Wait a minute. I didn't want it to do this. But we're doing it live. We're doing it live. He brought up generic traits. He brought up the generic traits. I'm gonna go with warrior stuff just because why not? Where is traits? Azurite. There we go. Okay, so look, this is just a very basic example. Now you got your rating traits all the way up here, which is great. Okay. But then you're like, oh man, you got your generic traits. And I'm just like, so, for instance, Reckless Fury is one of the best spec stuff for Fury right now. 1,700 DPS. Now let's get something generic, like, I don't know, Secrets of the Deep. That is going to cut down your performance by 700. Come on, dude. And it probably sucks for tanking too. So it basically... Your generic traits is like, I mean, you can pick generic traits. You can pick a trait that sucks for both DPS and it also sucks for tanking. Is that the logic? It's like if you're constantly swapping back and forth, you might as well get yourself a generic trait that sucks at both things. Come on.
There's something we go back and forth on a lot philosophically. And I completely understand, obviously. I don't mean to sound dismissive of course it would be simpler if you could just change these seamlessly.
Yeah, it would.
You could operate at full effectiveness, whether you're assassination or whether
exactly.
whether you're outlaw.
It would be real simple, wouldn't it?
To some extent, that is deliberate.
It's deliberate? You're doing it on purpose?
At least a bit of friction between changing specs and operating optimally in your other spec. I think someone who is dedicated fully to a given specialization, that is who they are, that is what they are, should have some small advantages over somebody who's seamlessly changing between two specs as the need suits them. And some of that is because we're also looking at balance between hybrids and pure classes. It's a druid, a priest, a shaman may not have multiple options if they want.
Okay, wait a minute. You're looking at balance between hybrid classes? You better look real good. Because, I mean, if we can just talk about a hybrid class, which is the warrior, then again, all tanks are hybrid classes. Because every single tank has a DPS spec, right? Warriors have two specs. Tanking and DPSing. And then you look at something like a monk, which has three specs: tanking, DPSing, and healing. So you could say that the monk is an even higher level hybrid, so to speak, because it can perform more roles. Wait a second, this thing is 1 hour long? Holy shit. But anyways, so as a tank, as a warrior tank, you are literally worse than every other tank in the game. And then you have druid tanks, you have monk tanks, which both can heal, you have paladin tanks, which also can heal, that all of them have an additional spec beyond the warrior, and they're all better at everything. Well, not everything. The warriors can still compete on the DPS end of things. But again, it's like you're...
want to do damage.
It's weird.
Whereas rogue, mage, hunter, warlock can, and that's by design to a certain extent. Subtlety rogues might shine on single target encounters. Outlaw may do better with cleave and AoE. But in a world where they can seamlessly do both as the need suits them without any loss of efficiency, that is a very difficult advantage to balance against the rest of the game who doesn't have that option available to them. And again, what we're talking about here is just a few percent, right? It's if you want to play a certain spec for, you're trying to do your Mythic plus.
Just a few percent in the example that I gave you. I can do the math real quick. Let me pull it up. We're actually going to do the math of how much of a percent the example I gave was. So we were talking about Reckless Fury, which was 1,700, and then we were talking about Secrets of the Deep, which was 1,000. So if this is 100%, then this is... See if I can still do math. 1,000 times 100 divided by 1,700. It's only 58%. Not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. It's only a 58. It's only a little bit of a percentage, you guys. It's only 58% more efficient, depending on the trait that you.
Or you're just helping your friends out, or you're jumping into PvP. missing one trait or having a slightly less effective trait or wearing a 370 pair of shoulders because you don't have a 385 with for the spec that you want, that's going to make you a couple of % less effective.
A couple of a
if you are
percent.
looking to push
58.
world first mythic kill or top 100 mythic raid kill, or you're trying to push mythic 15 in time, those every % matters. But for the vast majority of the content that you're doing, you're still easily effective enough to accomplish your goals. And in the long term, as we look to increase the availability,
this is a terrible mentality. You're effective enough. You're good enough. You don't excel, but you're good enough.
380, 385, and all of your other pieces in that slot are 340 because you haven't been able to get any others. Then swapping that piece out can feel like an unacceptable sacrifice. But I think hopefully with the emissary,
it's like, that's the thing. Whenever you are playing a game like World of Warcraft, you can never aim to be good enough. At least in my opinion, that's the way that I look at it. You always need to be as best as I possibly can. This is the reason why I don't tank as a warrior anymore, because it's useless. If you want to be really good at tanking, you should just get another class right now until they get around to fixing protection warriors. Because as a World of Warcraft player, this is the way that I look at it. You should always aim to be the best that you can possibly be at whatever your chosen spec is. Okay? You can be good enough on certain situations, but ultimately you always want to aim to be the best that you can possibly be, because that is how you'll be able to progress in the game. That's how it works, unless you're a complete casual player, at which point all these changes don't really matter to you that much. But you should always aim to be the best. You should never aim to be, oh, this is good enough. This is good enough is not going to work when you start trying to do heroic raiding. That's when you're going to realize, oh, turns out this isn't good enough. Whoops.
Very change that we made recently and increased availability overall, people should find themselves with more options for a given slot.
Okay. And it's kind of thinking over what you're talking about here. It's sort of the sense of, like, say I'm my guild's main tank, right? And I've been devoting all of my gearing and all of my efforts into being the best tank that I possibly can be. I should have a little bit of an advantage over somebody who maybe they play Retribution majority of the time, maybe they play Holy the majority of the time. And I should be a better choice for that tank role in the raid than somebody who's been spending all their time gearing up another spec.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that if you decide you want to change specs, over the course of a few weeks, you can get to that point of optimal efficiency. You replace some of your gear, you refocus your secondary stats, but it's not something you can do just at the drop of a hat. All that said, I think in many ways, one of the lessons we learned from feedback in Legion, I think has led...
When he says over the course of a few weeks, this all depends on RNG. Like, literally, it all depends on RNG. You can't specifically target, pieces of gear that you want because of the limited availability of Azurite gear. Like, if you're lucky, you will get the gear that you need in order to be able to perform these two specs. If you're unlucky, those weeks can turn to months or even years, depending on how unlucky you actually are. The emissary quests change that they did, for instance, I got 2 armor pieces and neither of them was an upgrade for either my main spec. I was able to use one of them for my off spec, but the other one was just completely useless. And it's like, the RNG is too much. It's like these couple of weeks that you're talking about can be 2 weeks, or they can be 2 months, or they can be 2 years, which is not good enough.
Us to make spec switching much easier in most ways in BFA than it was in Legion. I think if you think back to how those systems worked, especially early on, you had legendaries that were just for a specific spec and nothing could change those. Or you had your artifact power focused on a single artifact and the others were farther behind. Or you got a holy relic drop from a raid boss, and you had to decide whether you put it into your holy artifact or your Ashbringer for Ret, and that was a irrevocable choice. And none of those systems exist in those ways in Battle for Azeroth, but we do, like I said, want to preserve a little bit of friction, a little bit of difference, even if it's just a few % effectiveness between...
You just want to annoy your player base, is what I read
and the
here.
Rogue who just switches when it feels
He's just like, you know what? We want you guys to suffer just a little bit.
I remember when we were first talking about the Azurite system months and months and months ago at this point, and talking about the reforging aspect of it, one of the original ideas that was being kicked around was, well, maybe you can only reforge one Azurite piece once every week or 2 or something like that. And we moved away from that because, like, obviously if you if you are that Retribution Paladin and then your tank leaves and it's like, okay, well now I have to go protection, it would suck to have to wait 3 weeks to have all of your Azurite gear be suited for protection.
Exactly. And then 3 more weeks to have it go back to
exactly,
yeah.
But then that kind of opened up the opposite angle where people were then able to just reforge back and forth constantly, which then those escalating gold costs came in, which actually ties into the next question that we have here, which comes from Turnberry, who says, how does restricting Azurite trait reforging through exponential gold costs improve gameplay? With the new outer ring in 8.1, it seems like it will severely punish players who play multiple specs.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think that this flow, ties directly into the last question. It was just as you just mentioned, Josh. It was a solution to trying to come up with a way to solve the problem of if you feel like you need or want to change specs in a long-term sense, that shouldn't feel punishing or overly restricted. Or also even just maybe you got a better piece for your main spec in this slot. You want to turn your other piece into an elemental piece or a shadow piece to use when you're out questing or DPSing. Those should all be like ready options. The thing we wanted to avoid was turning this into just an extra set of talents effectively with a lot more baggage, where on every boss fight, the same way you might use a Tome of Tranquil Mind and move a couple of talents around in your rows, you also felt, okay, I'm going to go respec all of my Azurite traits to be optimal for this fight, and then respec them again to be optimal for the next fight. The way the system works, to be clear, is every time you respec, the cost of respecking doubles, but then it also decays pretty rapidly. I think every 3 days.
I wouldn't say it's pretty rapidly.
So what that means, it starts out, I think, 5 gold. So if you've never respec and you want to change all 3 of your pieces that you use primarily from one spec to the other, let's say you're going from Frost Mage to Fire Mage, that's going to cost you 5 plus 10 plus 20, literally 35 gold, which is basically nothing. And then 6 days later, the cost will be back to 5 gold.
But if you then need to respec your pieces again for whatever reason, it's going to go to 70, 140, and then 3.
You're going to run into
280
costs.
And
I know,
and then if you have to do it again,
the screenshots that seem comical,
right?
Where someone is posting their 80,000 gold respec cost, but the only way they got to that point was by paying 40,000 gold for the prior one and 20,000 gold for the one after that. And all of that said, again, if you just go a week without respecking, that's going to be down to 1/8 of what it was, and then another week 1/8 of that again until it's all the way back down to nearly.
So basically, don't respec. Be good enough. Don't be the best you can be.
You, unlike a lot of items where it is often for a specific spec. What is your loot spec when you killed this boss? This is the trinket that you got. It procs from healing spells. Or this is the shield that you got because you were set to protection spec instead of retribution. Here you have the ability to change the items, but not endlessly, not infinitely, not without restriction.
Okay. And I know we've floated the idea around at certain points about resetting the cost of the Azurite trait reforging if we do large balance passes, or possibly obviously there's a whole bunch of changes coming to traits in Tides of Vengeance.
Yes.
Is that something we're still looking into the possibility of doing?
Yes, that's something that we're definitely looking to do. We didn't have the technical ability to do it. We are working on making that possible for Tides of Vengeance. And then once we have that, we could also use it again in the future if we ever make significant changes to a given class's Azurite traits. We could reset your reforging costs the same way back in the day, talent points would often get refunded when talent changes were made.
Okay, cool. Next question about Azurite gear comes from Eris, who asked, will there be new traits on Mythic plus Azurite gear in 8.1 and beyond, or are those of us focusing on dungeons as our only endgame activity stuck with the same ones for 2 years? So talking about, obviously, we've been pretty clear in the past that the traits that are on the Azurite gear are preset. We specifically choose which traits are on each piece of gear. How are we incorporating that into Mythic Plus, where obviously the items don't really change?
Right. So going into Season 2, all the existing items will have this extra ring on them with 2 traits, which will include some of the new traits that are being added in Tides of Vengeance. And then beyond that, I think we'll continue that philosophy going forward. I can't say with certainty how things are going to work in later patches after this one.
So wait, all of the items are getting it?
The plan is to continue supporting and evolving the system for all of these endgame progression paths, and Mythic Keystones are obviously a huge part of that.
Okay. Cool. Another Mythic Plus question from Korax, who asked, any plans on changing the way to acquire Azurite gear from Mythic Plus dungeons? The fact you can only get it from the weekly chests at the moment is slightly disappointing and frustrating. This has been one of the...
Slightly disappointing? Slightly? Slightly frustrating. It only made me want to quit the game God knows how many times after a Mythic Plus, but it's only slightly disappointing.
Yep.
It's most common suggestions as well.
And I would say it's arguably more than slightly disappointing.
Hey!
It sucks. Like, and
it does suck.
We're not happy with how that works. We are trying to come up with
it's good to
a
know.
middle ground that makes sense for the game as a whole.
Good to know.
The most common suggestion is we'll just let it drop from end of run chests.
Exactly.
And clearly that would give you the ability to target specific pieces.
Exactly.
It would still only be 370 as opposed to 385.
Why is that a problem?
But our concern with that approach is that that's great if your playstyle is spamming Mythic Plus all week, which is actually a pretty niche playstyle. Lots of people do Mythic Keystone Dungeons. Most people just do a handful every week, just one or two to get their weekly chest in, and it complements their other gameplay that they're doing. Others have that as their focus, as their sole activity.
Dude, like, ever since I've played World of Warcraft, sure, I raid because I like raiding and I think it's fun, but my favorite thing is 5-man dungeons. It's always been. Like, if you guys go back to this channel and you go watch, like, the first videos that I did, I would always be making videos about tanking 5-mans because that is something that I really, really like. Now I understand why I haven't been getting loot. It's because Blizzard's like, yeah, nobody really wants to run these dungeons anyway. It's like, what the fuck? What is that? Come on. It's what I like doing the most. I love running dungeons. I love it. I love tanking dungeons. What the hell, dude? And he's just like, yeah, that's very niche. Oh, okay. Now I understand why I haven't gotten crap for loot. You just expect people to like run one mythic so that they get their RNG loot piece off of the chest on the weekly reset. And that's it. No wonder I've run Toll to Gore +6, +7, +8 over, I don't know, 8 times since the last reset. And I haven't gotten the damn weapon to drop. Now I understand. You actually don't want to give players loot in the instance itself. You just want players to get loot from that dumbass chest at the end of the week. Sorry, dude. That is a problem.
All the other sources of Azurite armor in the endgame have some sort of restriction on how often you can get them. Right? I mean, there's more control if you're raiding Uldir. You know which boss drops the piece you want. You have a chance to bonus roll it. But at the end of the day, there's just that one shot a week. And if you want, maybe Zul drops your helm, you get your one crack at Zul every week, and if he doesn't drop it, he doesn't drop it. Come back again next week, try again. Same with PvP. You're getting your items either from the weekly, conquest progression, or from your weekly chest. You can't get Azurite armor from your end of match rewards, and so we have concerns about making end of run mythic chests the only spammable way of targeting a specific piece, and what that would do to the comparative value and rewards of all of our different endgame tracks.
So you just make Mythic Plus less rewarding than anything else.
It's the best way, it's the only way really of getting a crack at a guaranteed 365, 370 level piece of gear on a regular basis, as much time as you want to put into
regular basis, once a week.
We only get that one shot a week per boss, but so we don't want to tip that too far in that direction. That's why we haven't done that. That said, the current system is not great. I know that if you are that player whose focus is dungeons, feeling like you only have this one chance a week at getting an Azurite armor piece, and then you also, if you do get one, it's gonna be pulled from this giant pool where you feel like you have very little control or agency when it comes to what.
How about that suggestion? How about that suggestion I gave you? How about that? Actually, tell you guys what. I'll show it to you right now. I'll show it to you right now, live here on the Warcraft Rui channel. I will show it to you. Let me show it. Let me show you how you got to do this, okay? Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go into the game, okay? It's so easy. It's just so easy, okay? Here's what you got to do. You're going to come into the game, and then you're going to click over here where it says Adventure Guide. My shortcut for it is Shift-J. I'm not sure if that's the default one, but anyways, you click here, Adventure Guide. Then on Adventure Guide, you can go to Dungeons. And then on Dungeons, you got all of the dungeons available. So for instance, one thing that I've been really trying to get this week is in Tol Dagor. So you go to Tol Dagor, and then you can actually, oh, there's a loot tab right here. So how about I go over to this loot tab, and I just tell you, hey, you know what? Actually, I got my gear filtered for priest because we were farming stuff for our priest. Give me a second here. I go here and I say, hey, Blizzard, you know what? I really want this weapon. It's got the best possible stats for me, so that's why I'm running this instance non-stop. How about if I can click? If I can just click this weapon. Click it. I click this weapon, and there's a higher chance of it dropping in the instance. Or I click this weapon, and there's a higher chance of it coming... No, actually, if it comes on the Mythic, on the weekly chest piece, it needs to be a goddamn guaranteed chance. I click on it, and then when the week rolls around, I go to the chest down there. There's a chest like down there somewhere, and I get it. How about that? Something that allows me to actually influence the loot that I want to get out of an instance. Here's the other thing. I was actually running with my warrior. I was not aware of the fact that Azurite chest pieces don't drop on Mythic Plus because I don't believe that that is mentioned anywhere in-game. Okay, I was not aware of this. Eventually my guild told me and I was like, oh, what the fuck? So I was basically running Waycrest Manor because I wanted to get a chest piece for my warrior. That was what I was doing. I was running Waycrest Manor for the chest piece, and I believe that I was running Motherlode for the shoulders. 2 pieces that didn't actually drop. Come on. But anyways, come on, dude. It's just... Or like Crazy 8 says, the old system where you get tokens for doing a dungeon, and then you use those tokens on gear. There you go.
That's not a satisfactory place. We are still discussing solutions to this problem. We want to solve the problem. We want to give ways of having more reliable access to Azurite armor if you were a dungeon-oriented player, as well as some ability to target, if there's a specific piece from Temple of Sethralus that you're interested in, we'd like there to be some way for you to express that and pursue
I
that
solved
goal.
it! I told you how to do it!
I don't have a specific solution to announce right now.
I just told you how to do it!
The answer is
it's not hard!
This is a problem. It's a problem we want to solve.
Okay. That's good news, at least. And I can understand how just straight up adding it to Mythic Plus, there's a lot of extra knock-on effects to have to worry about at that point.
Exactly.
So
I think, and again, with a lot of this, if that were the
but you just said that it's a niche play style.
Just Mythic Dungeons, we would do that.
Sure.
But we're trying to create and balance and maintain a holistic engine.
You just said it's a niche play style that most people don't do it anyways, so what's the problem? I don't understand.
Yeah, and there's already a lot of players who, like, there'll be a specific trinket or something that they feel like this is the best trinket for me, so I need to farm this one dungeon over and over and over and over and over again until I get that. A lot of players are okay with that. A lot of players are not. So adding more of that into the game, I could see why we would want to be
okay, so wait a minute. A lot of players are okay with it. A lot of players are not. So you're trying to tell me that the players that are not okay with you having to farm a specific dungeon, they're going to be okay with it just being fucking random? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but okay.
Question from I'm Frode on Twitter, who asked, what's the deal with traits that require... This one kind of sounds like a Jerry Seinfeld. What's the deal with traits that... That's a terrible impression, I'm sorry. With traits that require third-party sites like Wowhead to explain what they actually do.
What is the deal with that?
I cannot talk. You guys can read it. Resetting traits can quickly reach insane gold costs, so testing on your own is not a good option.
Yes.
Yes. What,
traits like stand as one.
What the power of the Horde is?
Yeah, exactly. What's the power of the Alliance? I've seen that one as well. It's like, what the fuck is the power of the Alliance?
You with the power over Spirit of the Horde. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, no.
To me anyway.
Yeah, we're going to fix those in the next patch. I think that's the specific one in question. I think what it actually does is it has a chance. It drops a random banner that's themed after your own race. So if you're a Horde player, you might see an Orc banner or a Troll banner or a Forsaken banner. Those each have different effects or give you a secondary stat bonus of a different type.
Okay.
And so I think that was just a fallback tooltip from a designer who, it's a whole lot to try to encapsulate in a single tooltip. We're going to revisit the design and the way we express it and make it clearer. It's not reasonable to ask you, we agree, to choose between something vague and something that very clearly says it, procs 3,500 nature damage when you do X, which is at least understandable.
Sounds good. Makes sense. Question from John Has Skittles on Twitter. Said, will you be retiring any of the older traits in 8.1? Right now, it just feels like there are so many of them, and the newer 8.1 traits will end up being so few compared to the older ones. And I know we said previously that we weren't going to, but that's been an ongoing discussion since then.
Yes. So I mean, we're adding a number of new traits that people have been seeing that have started to pop up on the PTR, and you'll see new ones with each upcoming build. But yes, we are also going to be retiring and, in fact, replacing some specific traits across various specs that have just been unpopular, less successful designs. I think there's some that we've looked at that weren't particularly popular, and it was down to tuning, and we could just fix the numbers and it would be fine. There are others where really it was either too simple, frankly a bit on the boring side, or there wasn't an adequate tuning knob to make it powerful enough to be desirable without breaking some aspect of the class or rotation. And so we're just going to retire those and introduce new ones in their place.
All right. So let's move on from Azurite. We'll talk a little bit about, we got a couple of class questions in here. We don't normally hit class questions, but there's some pretty good ones that came in. Question here from Anti, who said, are tanks being looked at? It's extremely underwhelming that guilds are mostly looking for brewmasters and DKs because they are way too strong compared to the others.
Oh man, I'm so curious to see the answer to this question. You cannot believe how curious I am to see what they have to say about this. Because I've been saying it. I've been saying it ever since I started in BFA. I'm like, dude, protection warriors fucking suck. They suck. Yesterday, I actually joined the group with my monk, and they were debating why they didn't want it to have a warrior tank earlier. To tank a +5. A +5. I've tanked +7s with my warrior, and these people are just like, nah, dude, I don't want no warrior on a +5. No, thank you. I was like, what the fuck? That's how bad warriors are right now, dude. It's not even, they're not in a good place. No, they're not viable, okay? They're not even viable. Guilds will get any other tank before they get a warrior. Literally, any other tank. And brewmasters, as someone who's playing a brewmaster, they're fucking overpowered. Especially on Mythic Plus. Because you know what we can do on trash? Brewmasters? It's like, oh, this trash is dealing a lot of damage right now. I'm just going to Ring of Peace right here. And it just pushes every mob away from you. You'll still have aggro, and you can still throw kegs, but you're effectively invincible. It's like having a paladin bubble whenever you want, except this bubble can actually protect other party members as well. When I did that for the first time, I was like, what the fuck? Are you for real? Their stun is better than a shockwave. Their stagger is hands down the best tanking ability I've ever seen. I haven't really seen Blood Death Knights. I've heard they're pretty overpowered as well, but like the stagger mechanic, I don't know how you can get any other tank to compete with the stagger mechanic. I just don't know. Let's see what they have to say about it.
I know that we've been talking a lot with the class team about tank balance. Do we have any updates to share along those lines here today?
Yes. So yeah, tank balance is definitely something the team is looking at. We agree that both Brewmasters and Death Knights are probably have a bit too much in the way of overall survivability compared to other tanks.
You don't
On
say.
the other end of the spectrum, Protection Warrior and Guardian Druid feel like they're lagging behind.
Lagging behind? Lagging behind? Dude, they're not lagging behind. They're not even in the same fucking zip code. They're not even in the same goddamn continent. Lagging behind. They're not even in the same goddamn planet. They're in Draenor right now. Shit, I even threw my friggin' headset away. Okay? Protection warriors and guardian druids are in fucking Draenor, while everybody else is in Kultiris and Zandalar. Okay? Shit, they're not even in the same timeline. They're in like Warlords of Draenor. Okay? That's where they are right now. Lagging behind. Psh. Fuck, they're probably in Final Fantasy XIV how far away they are. Not even in the same goddamn franchise.
Some of that is numerical tuning. Some of that is also, especially on the side of Prot Warrior, just overall rotational flow, and there are issues there that go beyond.
So they're clunky? Like I've always said, the protection warriors are clunky as fuck. Not to mention that you fucking broke them with Ignore Pain. Like, I'm sorry, guys, you have to let me give these retorts on this part.
On just numbers that are being looked at and discussed, and I think we're hoping to get some changes out to PTR.
They're lagging behind, okay? Protection warriors, they're just lagging behind to the point where you have to rotate your cooldowns on every trash pull that you do. Okay? You know, the same trash pull that a monk goes in doesn't even do a fortifying brew. Just fucking spams a little bit of Keg Smash and, I don't even know the name of the abilities. The Blackout Strike and, what's the other one? Tiger Kick? Is Tiger Kick? Tiger Palm? You know, just spam those 3 abilities, not even pay that much attention. Even forget doing Breath of Fire, because who gives a shit? And they do it fine. And as a warrior, you have to go in there, you have to shield block, Ignore Pain, Last Stand, shield wall, to even have a chance. Is that the kind of lagging behind we're talking about?
In the not too distant future there. I think at the same time, I think it's also important to frame the discussion of, you know, what tanks bring to the picture.
Exactly.
Yes, damage taken per second or external healing required. That's a very
what
real
warriors
metric,
what warriors bring
to
to the table? Tell
overall, recognizing there's some tanks that are going to be better against magical damage, some tanks
Yeah,
are better
yeah,
against physical damage.
So
some
what are
different
warriors good
sources and
against?
nuances there, but at the end of the day, if you feel like, you know, you can't keep tank A alive despite your best efforts, then tank B feels nearly unkillable.
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to be a problem and something we need to address balance-wise. That said, beyond that, I think when evaluating tanks, a lot of it also we'd like to be a question of what's their broader toolkit, right? What else are they bringing to a dungeon? What are they bringing to
exactly?
a
What are warriors bringing to a dungeon?
like
Please.
Grip, or, you know, there are times where something like Spell Reflect was incredibly useful.
Dude. Spell Reflect? Spell Reflect. Spell Reflect. Spell Reflect. God damn. Every now and then, I don't even know what the cooldown of that thing is. Isn't that 40 seconds or something like that? Every 40 seconds, I can do 40,000 damage by reflecting a spell. Beat that, Brewmaster monks. Spell Reflect.
Even situationally, but to the point where it became a major, major advantage to have that tank present, to have that tank represented.
It's a Spell Reflect.
Also, you know, finally, a lot of the elements that make a tank skilled, I think, aren't quantifiable in terms of the, you know, damage taken per second or healing required metrics. I think it's been interesting following discussions, actually, speaking of brewmasters in this question. I think there's been a lot of interesting discussion in the brewmaster community in the last couple of days over, you know, some log analysis and comparing incoming damage profiles depending on whether you were keeping your iron skin up as much as you theoretically should be, or whether you were purifying more at the expense of that uptime, and what's the right way to play, and what are the costs of playing correctly and poorly, and what does that mean for the skill ceiling or the skill floor of a given spec. And again, like, the numerical stuff matters, but at the end of the day, I don't think we're trying to make tanking or and to stress our tanks in a way where they're constantly in danger of falling over. I think very rare encounters notwithstanding, or aspects of certain tyrannical bosses or high necrotic encounters in dungeons notwithstanding, feeling like you were doing everything correctly but you lost because your tank just dropped over dead isn't really a particularly satisfying mode of gameplay. It's something we've, I think, moved steadily away from over the years. Long ago, going way back 10 years at this point, it actually wasn't uncommon to have bosses that had the ability to literally two-shot a tank if they had a bad avoidance streak. That sucks. So if we're not, yes, taxing healer mana matters, and a tank who plays well, who manages their active mitigation, they should require less healing. And I think it's interesting, I think in the specific Brewmaster logs that are being discussed, the gap between correctly played and poorly played was something like 15% in terms of the additional healing required, which, on the one hand, some argue, well, that's not a whole lot. On the other hand, 15% in today's balanced climate, if a spec is 15% behind another, we're consistently told that is, unplayable and useless.
We were just talking earlier.
No. You don't get to throw out those numbers like that. Well, if it's 15% behind, it's still fine. No. Here's what you got to do. Here's the easiest way to do it, okay? I'm sure you guys can round up 5 people over at Blizzard that play World of Warcraft. There's 2 of you right there. Okay? So there's 2 of you. You got 3 more people in there that play World of Warcraft, okay? And then you gear out a character however the hell you want. Like, I'll even tell you what. You can gear a warrior tank and make him be 390 item level. 390. Okay? And then have everybody else be just like appropriately leveled. And then go do a Mythic plus 10. And then tell me how that went. I'll give you 390 item level on that goddamn warrior in the current patch. Okay? And you just take everybody. I don't even know what's the appropriate item level for a 310, to be completely honest. The highest I've gone is a plus 8. So I don't know what's the item level for a plus 10. I've done a plus 8 with about 350 on my monk. So I'm even telling you, just go overboard. 390 every item on the goddamn warrior. And go do a plus 10 with that warrior tanking. That's all the testing you need right there. And then let me know about, it's 15%, it's not that unplayable. Yeah, let me know how many times you died. Let me know how many times your healer just goes, what the fuck happened? The fuck happened? And your warrior goes like, well, I had shield block up. I didn't have enough rage to cast Ignore Pain. Then shield block went down. I didn't have another shield block charge, and I was still rage starved, so I died. Or better yet, no, it's like shield block was up, then it went down, then I took a big chunk, then I popped Last Stand, then I took another big chunk, then I popped shield wall, then I took another big chunk, then I was able to pop shield block again, but I was too low and I died with 390 item level.
Reforging an Azurite trade for like 2% for 80,000 gold.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But anyway, all of that said, I think the skill in being a tank is often more about just overall battlefield management. It's about positioning, anticipation, taunting that new ad that came in, charging over to interrupt something or lock it down. And I think if you ask melee DPS especially, the biggest difference is very obvious.
Managing the battlefield, which the warrior fucking sucks at right now. Any other tank, well, not the druids. Druids don't have better mobility, but pretty much demon hunters have better mobility. Brewmaster tanks have better mobility. I don't know what Death Knights have, but it's just like the warrior mobility, for instance, compared with a Brewmaster monk. Dude. And the warrior mobility is supposed to be like one of its highest things. It's supposed to be one of the biggest selling points of the warrior, is the fact that you can charge twice and then heroic leap, and then 15 seconds later, heroic leap again. That is supposed to be a big deal when the monk can do better than that with just using Chi Torpedo. Not to mention the monk can literally push enemies around. Demon hunters can literally pull every enemy on top of them to make sure that they don't spread around too much. Death Knights can death grip enemies onto them, effectively giving them 2 different taunts. Monks can also taunt enemies and make them move faster towards you. What's the warrior taunt do? Fucking nothing. Come on.
Playing with a very good tank versus an average tank, just in terms of how mindful they are about how the boss or how enemies in a dungeon are positioned or faced. Can you get to them easily without having to stand in bad things? Or can you cleave this ad that spawned? Or are you having to, choose between one or the other? Like, that's the stuff that I think is the real guts of tank gameplay. Whereas damage dealing gameplay is often much more quantifiable, and it's just like, hey, how quickly can you kill this thing? How big is your number? I think when it comes to tanks, we're looking to dial in damage taken per second numbers and healing required numbers, but we'd rather continue to expand and diversify the toolkits that they bring that make them great battlefield commanders when they're leading a raid or, leading a group through a mythic dungeon, because I think that's a big part of the tank fantasy.
My God, diversify the toolkit
and minimizing your damage taken. That's
man.
Part of it, but it's far from the whole picture.
Okay. And one other thing that I can add on to that, from talking to the class team the other day also, is that we're looking into tank damage as well, the actual amount of damage that tanks put out. So keep an eye out for some tuning changes along those lines, most likely on the PTR. Question from Darkani, who said, Resto Shaman are decent stacked healers and abysmal spread healers, while other healers excel at both. We're also the most unappealing Mythic Plus healer. What spec and talent changes can we expect based off the immense feedback you've been given?
We have indeed received a lot of feedback. Thank you, Shaman. Thank you, others. So healer balance also on our radar.
I hear disc priests are the best.
Shaman are probably.
I like druids.
There's a couple of issues here. I think it's accurate that shaman excel when there are stacked clumps of people. I think their signature spell has been Chain Heal for a long time. When Healing Rain was added to their toolkit, that kind of cemented them as a healer that thrives in environments where people are going to be clumped in predictable locations, which comes up a whole lot in a wide range of encounters. But then on the other hand, you have your Mythic Fetid Devourers and other things where people are forcibly spread out, and it's correct that they are less effective there in terms of their raw throughput. It is a problem if it feels like they're so far behind that you're better off bringing an undergeared healer of a different spec that's someone's alt than a very well-geared, skilled shaman. That's something that we need to fix. And so I'm not sure that that's a question of massive spec or talent redesign. Some of that is just strengthening some baseline spells, strengthening your throughput if you are just using more Riptides and more single target heals versus Chain Heal and Healing Rain. Also, I think with Resto Shaman in particular, the talent row, like you feel like you probably want to take Ascendance to do dungeons, which means that you don't take High Tide, which means that the way it's tuned currently, Chain Heal is basically if you don't have High Tide, you probably shouldn't be using Chain Heal as a spell very much, which significantly limits your toolkit there. So I think there are definitely changes we want to make on that front. On the other end of the spectrum, I think there are definitely a couple of healers that are too effective right now that are also kind of overshadowing others as a result. I think it's a problem that shaman feel like even in their situations that are optimal for them, they're still often coming out behind, say, Disc
So
Priest.
what you're saying is...
Disc Priest are something that really
What
very much
you're saying is you're not
going to
buff
month.
Resto Chamois, you're going to nerf everybody else.
Ceiling in particular. It's interesting, if you look at Heroical Deer, you actually see Disc behind Holy and faring, they're still very strong, but closer to the middle of the pack, closer to the average, whereas at the very highest levels in Mythic raids, and this is also spilling over into PvP, into Battlegrounds, into Dungeons, they have the potential to do more throughput than other healers while doing a fair amount of damage and being very versatile. Yeah, that's a problem. Like, we clearly, if one class has strengths and weaknesses and there's another class that's more of a jack of all trades, the jack of all trades shouldn't beat the first class in the areas of their strength, or we have a balance problem. That's one that we're looking at fixing. And again, the tank stuff, the healer stuff, I think at this point we're likely going to be targeting this upcoming Tides of Vengeance update for those changes. We don't want to, guilds and groups have their comp solidified. They've geared up certain classes at this point. They've learned many encounters relying on certain classes. We don't want to just hotfix change that out from under you.
Dude, so what you're saying is like, oh yeah, we're not fixing your class because at this point you know that you've re-rolled? Or we know that you... So it's like Protection Warriors, people who stuck with Protection Warriors, right? That didn't re-roll like I did. It's like, well, we understand that now your raid group solidified without you. So, tough shit. Wait for the next patch. It's been 2 months. I'm sorry, that's not okay. I completely disagree with this approach. Like, what are you talking about? You mean someone who plays the game as a protection warrior, for instance, or a guardian druid, like we still have a guardian druid in our raid, because guardian druids still have a lot of health, so they're still decent tanks, because warriors still can't compete with the health of guardian druids, so therefore they don't have the health, they don't have the mitigation, they don't have the survivability, they're just useless. Guardian druids can still bring their massive fucking health pools, just like slapping a big dick on the table. Boom. Big health pool. But it's like, what you're saying is, well, your raid teams have solidified around not having protection warriors, so we're not going to fix that. Is that what I'm hearing? Because I kind of feel like that's what I'm hearing. It's like, well, you know, people have gotten used to the way things are, so we're not going to fix it just yet. We'll fix it on the next patch, though. Don't worry about it. What? You can't be real.
We'd rather give a lot of advance notice as we head towards a major patch.
Right.
So I think those are the things that we're looking to address. Now, all of that said, and I know, you know, just I guess another philosophical note. I think again, healing per second matters a ton, but I think it's also these days overrated a little bit or overstated in importance compared to damage per second for a damage dealer. You know, I think there have always been historical comparisons between, you know, a damage reduction cooldown and something like tranquility, right? If you are relying on Devo Aura or the equivalent, well, that's not reflected in healing logs, whereas, you know, the Divine Hymn or Trank, that is. And yet they're both actually absorbing significant amounts of damage, reducing significant amounts of damage. There are other aspects to why you might want a certain healer present that, again, aren't reflected in who has the highest HPS. And, you know, on the Shaman front, Spirit Link is, by definition, generally, you know, HPS neutral. It's taking health from some, giving it to others, and then reducing some incoming damage. None of that is really reflected in your overall healing throughput, right. But it's probably the best healing cooldown in the game in most
situations. Doesn't that show up in logs, though?
That's a huge reason to have a Resto Shaman present. Or, you know, in a couple different talent rows, you very commonly see people take you know, damage reduction totems like Earthen Wall that are reflected in healing meters, versus, you know, Ancestral Vigor that's increasing the health of your targets by 10% on a max health basis, that may save lives when you're, you know, your Riptide that's going on somebody who's taking damage. You're now giving them a larger health pool, you're buffering them against something that otherwise would have killed them. That's a great reason to have a Shaman present, but if all you're looking at is who generates the highest healing per second on a sustained basis, those things aren't captured there.
Right.
And so maybe we can do a better job of trying to surface or message those in ways that are clearer to raid leaders, to pug leaders who are trying.
Here's the problem, though. That's all well and good when it comes to raids, you know? But what about on Mythic Plus, where the Shaman is the only healer? Does that mean that if the Mythic Plus doesn't survive, the tank dies or something like that, assuming it's a good tank like a Brewmaster or Death Knight? It's like, if the group falls in those situations, you know, is that because the Shaman didn't heal enough? Is that because all of those kits that you're talking about, you know, they're actually not as useful? Because that's what it appears to me that is being said. Shamans are saying, dude, we fucking suck at Mythic Plus. And it's like, if they suck at Mythic Plus, they're not competing with anyone for the numbers. The only thing they have to ensure is that the party stays alive and how comfortable the party feels. And if the party does not feel comfortable enough, it means that it doesn't matter all of those fancy things that you're talking about that Shamans have on their toolkit. It doesn't matter, because the party still didn't feel confident enough to go through with the instance. They still died a bunch of times during the instance, because regardless of how many regardless of how many tricks they pulled out of their sleeve, they still weren't able to keep the party up. That's what it boils down to. Sure, in raids, you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, this person's outputting more, this person's outputting less, and that's all you have to make your decision at the time. But ultimately, I just don't think that, you know, all of those, oh, but my fancy toolkit. It's like the same thing with words. Oh, yeah, spell reflect.
To evaluate who they should bring. And again, and finally, sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling here. That doesn't mean, none of what I said should be taken to mean that we don't think there are numbers problems as well. there also are those, but it's we want to take a multifaceted approach to the problem.
Okay. Question from Hex Zero, who said, the current PvP meta of everybody having tons of self-heal plus insane burst damage and healing, controlling the flow of battle, has left quote-unquote rock classes in the dust. Unholy DKs and affliction locks feel useless. Any plans to address?
This is PvP meta self-heal. Okay. Never mind. It's PvP
I know
stuff.
that
I don't know.
that we posted a few weeks ago that we were looking at Unholy DKs and Affliction Warlocks. Do we have any updates on what's going on there?
Yes, so I think some of that is, and this isn't a direct response to this, I know their survivability is definitely something that's on our radar also. Like, those are lower mobility specs, lower mobility classes that we want them to feel a bit tankier. And so currently it often feels like you might just get tunneled and not really have much recourse in those situations. We'd like to help on that front. Now, the overall pacing of arena matches is something that we're definitely looking at. We think it's important that there be room for pressure comps as well as burst comps. And if your goal is just to steady attrition, wearing down healer mana until you eventually can line up a kill, that should be a viable approach. Now, on the affliction lock side too, some of that is down to affliction historically has been that like spread dot pressure spec. Some recent changes in BFA made them a bit more single target oriented, which we've seen in other parts of the game too. And I think that's not totally consistent with our vision, or I think players' expectations of what affliction lock should be about. We'd like to pull them a bit more towards that multi-dotting place that they're better known for. Anyway, also yes, all of this is on our radar. I think at this point we're also trying to strike a balance between rapid reaction to things that we see coming out of weekend tournaments or trends at the high end of the ladder, but also letting the metagame evolve, letting comps establish themselves, letting counter comps rise to counter those. And I think there's risk of too much ongoing constant change, buffing and nerfing and buffing and nerfing that can stop a meta from ever really settling out. We have, this is Battle for Azeroth PvP Season 1. There are several to follow, and if at the end of the day this season is known more for a faster pace and for higher burst overall, but in a later season or in a subsequent season that starts to shift a little bit, I think that may be a valid approach for us to take rather than trying to just change the meta out from under people. But yeah, philosophically, we definitely agree there should be room for pressure and rot comps and not just lining up burst and securing a kill that way. Separately, sources of healing like survivability, hybrid healing especially, are something that we are looking to continually and more actively. I think we have been via hotfix and will continue to dial back, and that's something that also can help overall raise the effectiveness of steady pressure when you don't have all of this healing coming from different sources, and instead more of that is leaning on a single healer with a fixed mana pool to try to cover.
Okay, cool. And as for the changes that we were talking about for Unholy Death Knights and Affliction Locks a few weeks ago, keep an eye out on the PTR for those, actually. I believe from what I was talking with the class team about, the decision ended up being that they needed more than just some basic numerical tuning. So keep an eye out for, I believe they're looking into some changes for honor talent. So keep an eye out for that on the PTR. Also, I thought I had a question in here about Shadow Priest. I don't, but Shadow Priest, we're looking at you too, so yes, don't worry about that. Well, I mean, continue worrying about that. Continue giving feedback. But anyway, I got some questions about Warfronts here. This one comes from Trivia Cow, who says, Moo. Obviously.
Of course. Thank you, Trivia Cow.
Yep. Will the new Warfront run its cycle in parallel with the current one? So instead of waiting 3 to 4 weeks for a new cycle, you start a new one every 1 to 2 weeks. I'm talking about the new Darkshore Warfront coming in, Tides of Vengeance.
Yes, so yeah, the current plan is, so yes, they will run in parallel. We want to kick off Tides of Vengeance with Alliance attacking Darkshore right away, so not even contributing to attack, but day one, if you're Alliance, you can jump in, do the intro quest, queue for the Warfront, and go from there. And so effectively with this cycle of 2 areas that are now contested, 2 pieces of outdoor content, there'll be Warfront availability twice as often. You might find yourself currently being able to queue for the Arathi Warfront and do that, while also having access to Darkshore and the outdoor quests and World Boss there, and then that will flip-flop, but over time basically doubling the amount of availability.
Okay, and it's not like So it's not like a hard set, like when Arathi is attackable for Horde, then Darkshore is attackable for Alliance, but just starting it off in a way that
Warfronts are just
least
so
initially there's some
boring
sort of-
right now.
Exactly.
You
And I
can
think
literally
they'll
queue up
both
for a
have their
Warfront and
independent
AFK
contribution
and get a
cycles,
piece of
and the way
340
it
gear by
naturally
the end of it.
works, I think
for
we
doing
saw this a little
nothing.
bit with the buildings in Broken Shore and 7.2 last expansion.
You can literally
If there's
be
2 bars
listening to a
fill, people will
podcast,
actually
watching
gravitate
a
towards
show
the
on
ones closest to
Netflix.
Filling, which will
Do
make
a
it so that,
Warfront,
yes,
get a piece of
technically
gear.
they could both be active at the same time. In practice, they're very likely to cycle back and forth and be more stagnant.
And by the way, somehow it's okay that in Warfronts you can get Azurite gear out of them, can't you? I think you can. You can get 340 pieces of Azurite gear out of Warfronts, right? Yeah, you can farm those as often as you want, and you can basically, you don't even have to put in an effort.
So that it has an organic feel to it. It's not a rigid, like, okay, now that we're attacking Arathi, it's your turn to take Darkshore.
Right.
But the overall feel is likely to be that you're probably going to be attacking one and defending the other at any given time.
Okay. Question from Bullis, who said, any comment on why we still can't queue as raid groups for the Warfronts? This has been a pretty common request.
Yes.
So
Why?
this was a decision that was made about midway through Warfront development during beta in BFA. And it's about just the overall pacing of the Warfront experience. And we did internal playtests with full raid groups. And what we found was, while we had a lot of positive feedback and positive experiences when it was solo players or small groups getting together, it actually wasn't a whole lot of fun for large groups. The reason for that is it's not a tuning concern, right? We let you queue with an entire raid group if you want for LFR, and you can take your heroic raid guild and steamroll an LFR wing in 10 minutes flat. And yeah, it's not particularly hard, but if you want to trivialize content, fine, go ahead, go nuts. The problem with Warfronts is that with a full raid group working together with a couple of tanks supporting healers, full 20%
You can gear up
communication,
people too
what
fast.
often
Watch.
happened was you would just steamroll the map objectives and get very far ahead of the pacing of the other base building, resource collection, other mechanisms. It's kind of like a giant version of something like, Hellfire Assault or, other similar gauntlet raid encounters, where it doesn't matter if your DPS is too far ahead of the pacing of the encounter, it makes the encounter less fun. So the reason why we didn't do it was not it would be too easy, it was just a less fun experience. And so in practice, we focused on making it a, random queued, you can take a few friends in.
Dude, I'm sorry. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Come on. Come on, really? It was not fun? So you're saying if you're communicating with your group, it's not fun. It's better if everybody's fucking up and making mistakes because you're not all on voice channel and you're not all coordinating properly to do the thing, to make the thing go as fast as possible. Maybe you should have realized what that meant was, hey, maybe Warfronts are not that fun. Maybe we should tune them appropriately. But the problem is, if you did that, they wouldn't be appropriately tuned for the 5-player groups. And you don't want to leave those 5-player groups or single-player queues. You don't want to leave those people out in the dust. So you instead just leave the big great raid groups out in the dust. The reason your raid groups weren't having fun is because it's not a challenging encounter. Warfronts are not a challenging thing in the game at all, and they over-reward players for doing Warfronts as well. Like I just said, it doesn't make any sense. Warfronts as a whole just don't make any sense. I don't understand. It's like if your raid groups aren't having fun, probably means Warfronts are not fun. Which they're not.
And focus on objectives.
Like I said, you can
and
literally
overall, what we've
AFK.
seen with the pacing of how it plays out on live, the average Warfront length, just around the time you're typically taking over most of the middle of the map, is around the time you've probably got your armory, got your workshop up, you're building those siege engines, and you're ready to go finish the map. If you had the whole map controlled, then had to wait 15 minutes for all of your siege engines to build, that's just not a super fun experience. All that said, totally get there's desire, and things are more exciting when you can play them with a large group of friends. And so that's something we've been talking about, how and when we can add a new mode for the existing Warfronts that is actually tuned around a raid group. Whether we call this, heroic version of the Warfront or whatever, remains to be seen. But this is something we'd like to deliver. but the initial experience that we released with BFA was focused and tuned and paced around
Was bad.
just mass accessibility, or for the average player who is just queuing with a few friends or just solo queuing. We wanted to make sure that we could nail the pacing for that without worrying about, oops, there's also a 10-player raid group in here
Right.
who just steamrolled the whole map, and now people are overall feeling like they're having less fun.
Okay, so current Warfronts geared around or designed around the notion of everybody in there is, most people in there are completely pickup, but looking at the potential of adding some more.
They're good enough.
tuned
Yeah.
Warfronts in the future. Cool.
They're not the best.
Got a couple
They're
questions
good
about
enough.
allied races here. First one comes from Genka, who says, do you have any plans to readjust the Death Knight starting area / questline for the introduction of new allied races?
So, not currently. I think currently, allied races, many of them have their own little self-contained starting experiences. Their story fits very directly into Battle for Azeroth's narrative arc. That said, completely understand that if Death Knight's your favorite class, or you play a Death Knight and you've just unlocked this race that you really want to be, you want to be a Void Elf Death Knight or a Magkar Death Knight, not having that option available at all kind of sucks. And so we don't have any plans to announce right now, but that's definitely something we do want to address in the future.
Okay. Question from Thomas, who said, are there any plans to relax the unlock requirements around the Legion allied races? So Nightborne, High Mountain, Lightforge.
Yes, so we have some. So
There we
in
go.
in the next, so in Tides of Vengeance, the upcoming content patch, we are I think roughly doubling the amount of reputation awarded by the various old world quests. So you can get your Augustian reach rep, you can get your army the light rep twice as fast as you could previously, to just kind of speed those along now that they're not really content that anyone's doing for any reason other than going back to unlock these allied races.
Okay. That's good news.
Wait a minute. What about Dark Iron Dwarves? It's like, yeah, we're gonna make the Argosian rep be better. Yeah. What about that 7th Legion rep? No? Oh, okay. So it's like, hey, you want to have a Dark Iron Dwarf? Good luck.
Let's move on. Next question. We got a few questions that are more rating focused. This one comes from Sicarius, who says, how do you think the Siege of Zuldazar raid layout will affect the world first race, since Horde and Alliance will have bosses in different orders? So when we did the
I'd love to see him say I
Tides
don't
of
care.
Vengeance sort of reveal stream.
If he said I don't
a couple
care,
of weeks
I'd
ago,
laugh
we were
my
talking
ass
about
off.
Siege of Zelda. Well, you were talking about Siege of Zuldazar and how it's kind of two stories being told from opposing sides: the Horde defending Zuldazar and the Alliance attacking it. How does that affect the world first race?
So I guess a couple things. So as of now, we're currently actually thinking that we're going to call the raid Battle of Dazar Lore, because technically it's not a siege; it's this naval pincer attack from both sides, unlike Siege of Orgrimmar that was this whole assembled army in front of the gates. Also, Zuldazar is the entire zone. It's not like the actual capital city. The pyramid that's being attacked is Dazar Lore. So we'll see. We'll name still under discussion, but that's what we're currently thinking. Raid layout. So the current thinking is actually the 9 bosses that exist may actually be faced in the same order between the two factions. That is to say, for Alliance, they may play through the entire battle up to facing Rastakhan, and then have the recap of what they missed told through the eyes of a survivor of the Horde attack and the naval battle with Jaina once they complete that. Whereas for Horde players, they may actually get their flashback moment actually in the middle of the raid. Once they reach Rastakhan, find what's happened to him, and then are told, hey, this is what the Alliance did before you got here. Here's how that played out, before they then resume and finish off their version of the story.
Okay.
So in practice, boss 9 effectively may be the same boss for both factions. That said, there are going to be some mechanical differences. There are going to be some differences here between the two experiences. And, I know that will cause some debate over, does the world first really matter if this was different than what the other faction was doing? I think I trust the community to figure that out. And if the answer is, hey,
No,
for
listen,
this
dude.
tier, we're going to say there's a Horde first and there's going to be Alliance first, and people can argue.
Here's what I think. I think that the best guilds in the world, they need to just step it up and they need to have one portion of the guild raid the Horde version of the event, and the other portion of the guild raid the Alliance version of the event. And hey, if you have to gather 3 different pieces of Azurite gear to do it per class, tough shit. Step it up.
You over which one was real or which one was more, impactful, so be it. I think, the world first race is something that is obviously it's intriguing. It's always amazing seeing the very, very best raiders in the world practice their craft, and it was super cool watching Method do it live through Uldir last month. But we're building our raids to present an epic experience, to tell a story, to create engaging and immersive battles for millions of players, and we're always going to prioritize the depth of that experience over the nuances of the race. While it's something that we take into account, we wouldn't throw out an otherwise, I think, pretty cool idea to really deliver this asymmetrical faction experience through raiding just because it might cause some controversy over who the real world first was.
Yeah, it'll still be an exciting world first race pretty much regardless as well. So we'll have to see. I think it's interesting, like, looking at this, the world first race isn't something that Blizzard created. Like, that was something that the community sort of bandied around. And it was really the community that created the world first race and developed it into what it is nowadays. So it's kind of up to the community to decide how to treat the world first race.
And the official Hall of Fame that we now have on our website has a separate Horde section, separate Alliance section. So,
question from Jarthan, who said, raid trinkets in Uldir have been terrible in comparison to other trinkets outside of the raid with no changes. Can we expect better tuning in 8.1? Or do we need to keep hoping for higher Titanforge trinkets from Mythic Plus or World Quest?
You keep hoping for that RNG Titanforge, motherfucker, and you enjoy it.
Better tuning. I think obviously there are a few good trinkets in there here and there. I think for the Zarlor raid, I think we'll have an exciting new crop of them. It's something we've actually we agree. We look at the same data and we're looking at the same sims and understand that increasingly the community values a lot of trinkets from dungeons or even from world quests or emissaries, theoretically, if you could get them to Titanforge high enough, over raid trinkets. We've asked ourselves, why is that? I think part of the conclusion that we've come to is that it has to do with how we're building and budgeting those trinkets, and there are adjustments we can make there to our philosophies going forward. I think raid trinkets...
No, listen. You're wondering why someone wants a specific trinket over a trinket that you put in your raid? The answer is incredibly simple. Okay? It's because if you're a tank, the trinket outside of the raid will give you more survivability. If you're a DPS, it's because the trinket outside the raid will give you more damage. And if you're a healer, it's because the trinket outside the raid will give you more healing. Those are the only reasons people will prefer trinkets outside of the raid versus trinkets inside of the raid. Trinkets aren't even items that have any visual effect on your character. The procs, sure, they're cool. Particularly, I really like the one with the cannon that drops down and shoots at people. But ultimately, I will always pick up the trinket that gives me the most chances of surviving an encounter. I will pick up the trinket that gives me the best of the stats that I need. As will everyone. It's not a big mystery. People pick the trinkets that give them the best performance. How can you not... How can you even... What?
Trinkets we try to make deliberately more interesting. We try to, they're often more flavorful, often directly themed after boss abilities of the boss that drops them. And so, while a World Quest trinket might just be its strength, proc crit, the, raid trinket might be your attacks have a chance to inject the target with some toxin, and when it reaches this number of stacks, it explodes and does a certain thing. The key difference is that latter effect often is fixed in its throughput, and there aren't as many interactions with player action.
It won't scale.
Whereas when we just say we're giving you a lot more primary and secondary stat, whether it's a stat stick or a proc trinket, if you are if I am twice as good a player as you, if I do 15,000 DPS and you do 8,000 DPS with the same gear, that trinket is also going to be more effective for me than it is for you. Whereas the flat proc damage trinket, or has a chance to trigger an AoE effect that has a flat amount of damage, will actually do an equal amount of damage for both of us. And the sims that are used to guide a lot of gearing decisions these days are assuming optimal gameplay. They're assuming you're fighting Patchwork, or you're fighting an AoE set of targets and playing perfectly. And so those passive stat trinkets are given their full theoretical possible value that many players in practice won't be able to achieve. But those are being compared against, like, that scaling value at its very highest point is being compared against the fixed value of raid trinkets. And so it may just, like, we don't want to stop making interesting and flavorful raid trinkets. I mean,
sure,
we could solve this problem by just, saying raid trinkets are, mastery proc int and crit proc strength, and leave it at that. Instead, I think we just need to revisit our tuning philosophies and the way we build some of these trinkets.
How
to make
about
sure
those
that
trinkets? Listen.
are
No.
still
Ian, I'm talking now. So listen. How about what you do is you make that flat damage number that you're saying that it does after you build up the neurotoxins or whatever on your target? How about that damage scales with your primary stat? Fixed. Someone at Blizzard, hire me.
comparable to the best ones out there. I think we obviously can do this, it's just a question of numbers, right? Draft of Souls was in Legion was a triggered unused damage effect, but if the number's high enough, it can be good enough. We just need to better calibrate how we're making them.
Okay. Question from Jugs, who said, rating has lost its uniqueness with the removal of tier sets, endgame weapons, and trinkets also coming from Mythic Plus, etc. Any plans to bring uniqueness back to raids? I mean, obviously, there's the unique aspect of there's significantly more people and the encounters are significantly more involved. But talking about like the specific itemization in raids, is there any?
Yes, for sure. I mean, and obviously, there are titles and there are unique gear sets, and there are things you can get from raiding that you can't get elsewhere. I think definitely, it used to be a long time ago that the only way to get good endgame loot was raiding. Period. Mm-hmm. And there were no alternative sources. The so-called raid or die era. We've moved away from that deliberately, and I think there's a ton of people who are enjoying just doing Mythic Plus and focusing on hard content with a small group of friends. But at the same time, we want to make sure that there is still something special and rewarding for those who enjoy getting together a larger group of people and dealing with raiding. Tier sets were a piece of that, though honestly, I don't know that they really fit the bill there either in the long run. If you look at a tier like Antorus, many people could jump into pugs and relatively quickly get their set pieces at a certain level, get those set bonuses within the first few weeks of doing the raid, especially if you're in a better guild that's clearing that content early. The set pieces didn't feel like the long-term goal that they once had, like way back, a decade ago in classic days, where it might be a year-long journey to get your full, 10 storm set together. The tier pieces in Legion and Warlords and Mists were something that you probably got within a few weeks. And then after that, well, what was the thing that differentiated raiding from the rest of the game for the whole rest of the tier? So, yes, we this is something to think about. It's something that we'd like to do more regarding. It's something we're looking at, itemization, flavor. Just because we don't have 4-piece formal sets doesn't mean we can't have smaller sets, like little 2-piece sets here and there, or items with flavorful effects like Drape of Shame from Karazhan, or the Anchor Chain Girdle, things like that have come from dungeons. We'd like to start to do more of that across the game in general, so that, yes, if you're looking to get your item level up, there's equal progression paths, but each one of these systems should offer some unique and flavorful rewards that aren't available in the others, that help differentiate folks who focus on one from folks who focus on the other.
Okay. Starting to run out of time here, so we're going to move on a little bit here. Question here from Tyrus, who said, any concrete plans to make island objectives more varied? Current structure is just AoE and mine your way to the finish.
Yep. So, yeah, obviously, getting Azurite is always going to be the objective of Island Expeditions. The thing we're looking to vary significantly is just how you get that Azurite. I mean, killing rare spawns and killing creatures is always going to be part of the overall experience, but we're looking to add a lot more unique objectives and events that you can come across on those islands. So, one example of a new thing in Tides of Vengeance is extraction points, where you can take that point over and set up an Azurite extractor for your faction that will actually give you a steady trickle
I'll go
of
over
Azurite
my
for the
opinions
duration
at
of
the
the
end,
map.
so quick.
However,
I've been commenting
just
on some
like
stuff
a
that
control
you missed,
point in a
but,
place like a Wrathy Basin
I'll
or
go over the
Battleground,
overall
the
feel.
other faction's forces can come in and capture that and convert it to their side. So you might need to loop back occasionally or have someone keep an eye on it to make sure the other faction isn't taking it away from you. And that's just one example of several, right? I think we want to get away from islands feeling a bit too formulaic. I think that there are differences in the creatures that will spawn from week to week, differences in the environment, but I think we've all probably seen
The only
that
difference to
giant
me
Azurite
is whether
golems
they're
surrounded
ranged
by,
or melee.
lucrative stalagmites more times
So that
than
I know
we
if
care
I have to
to,
line of sight
and
them or not. Actually,
we'd like to,
how about you
significantly
talk
reduce
about
that,
how they
and
don't
part of that is
fucking
just
line of
increasing
sight? They
overall
just
variety.
ignore
Okay.
obstacles. They
Question here
shoot
from
through
Nayrok, who
walls and
said,
mountains.
You said that RP servers would not be affected by cross-realm sharding, yet I've seen many servers sharded into Emerald Dream. What's going on?
Okay, so the way RP servers work is, except for the new zones, they do not shard. They do not have any default cross-realm zone stuff enabled. So when you're in Stormwind, you're in Westfall, you're in Northrend, it's just people from your server. At the very, in the latest content, this is how it worked in Legion. Sharding is necessary in order to keep server stability fine. I think compared to how the game was back in the day, there are actually many times more people on any given realm at the high end than there were in the past. And a zone actually just doesn't support 1,500 people all in it trying to do world quests at the same time in the same space, both from a performance perspective, server-wise and client-wise, and just gameplay trying to get spawns. And so we need to have sharding enabled even on RP servers in Kultiris and Zandalar. Now, if you're talking about war mode in particular, there's a couple of extra factors here where war mode, normally our sharding logic tries to keep people from the same server together and only mixes in other servers if needed because the shards are underpopulated. War mode discards that and focuses on trying to maintain faction balance above everything else because that's essential for war mode.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
And then the final piece of this is, of course, there's a lot of just cross-server groups and pre-made group finder. If you're using that to do world quests, if you're jumping into a world boss group, like that's...
You want to know why it doesn't? My server is like 98% alliance. And if I turn war mode on, I will still get my face kicked off by thousands of hordes. So I'm sorry, but if that's what war mode's supposed to be doing, it's not. You're talking about a server that's over 90% alliance. And yet if I turn war mode on, it's just like there's horde everywhere. How does that work? That's not maintaining balance in my server. It's sharding.
It's not the game sharding people or putting people onto your server. That's them joining a group. And that you will see those groups running around. If someone joins a war mode group, it's going to be people from any different server that happen to see that group and signed up, running around, and that's just player construct, not something on our end.
Okay. So for a server like Emerald Dream, which has been historically PvP focused, now that war mode is in the equation here, do we have anything that can sort of bring back that RP PvP sort of mindset?
So, not currently. In terms of the way the system works, I think it's something where we can look at the numbers and try to understand whether specific servers like Emerald Dream would be able to support a healthy gameplay experience on their own. I think the problem is many other servers also have very sharp faction imbalances, and so having just a pool that only contained people from that server wouldn't make for a satisfying PvP experience for anybody. But we'll look into it and see if they could truly stand on their own and have a good experience. We can probably look into tech solutions to let select realms have the experience that they're looking for, but that's not currently how it works.
Okay. Question here. See how much time we got. We can probably do 2 more questions here. Here's a good one. It comes from Wasselin, who says, you hinted at a change to the group finder for Mythic Plus, such as being able to search by key level. Are those still in the works?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's there's just some design questions we're still working
I'd
through
rather
there
sort
in
by
terms
role.
of the system knowing what keystone you're listing the group for, making it clear if you are asking someone to bring their key as opposed to having one, and then also being able to search for a range as opposed to a specific number, right? Some people may want any 10 or higher. Some people may just be looking for Temple of Sethralus keys because of a specific item they want there. There's a few aspects of design that we're still working through, but we want to make the tool friendlier for folks who are using it to find Mythic Plus groups.
Okay. And this will be our last question for the day. It comes from Runatus on Twitter, who asked, currently, finishing the war campaign to get the 5th follower takes a while. Yeah. Any plans to make it more alt-friendly?
Yes, I think in general, alt-friendliness is a topic that we've discussed a lot for the upcoming content update, because we know a lot of folks are looking to get caught up and getting more alts to max level. So there's a few aspects to this. On the war campaign side, currently when you finish those individual story chapters, they actually give you hardly any reputation at all, and all your reputation comes from world quests, one-time bounty boards, emissaries. We're actually adding significant amounts of rep to those war campaign chapters, kind of like we did to the Suramar storyline back in Legion,
right?
So that just finishing one will, catapult you pretty close to being able to unlock the next, and so be able to more sequentially play through them, especially since we're adding new war campaign chapters, to the story in Tides of Vengeance. Separately,
so I should actually mention that in that case, I take back what I said about the Dark Iron Dwarves earlier. Because you said, Ian basically said, oh yeah, we're going to make it easy to unlock the other two. And I was like, what about 7th Legion rep? Looks like they're addressing that as well. So credit where credit is due.
I think other catch-up things we're looking at, we know that, with Horde and Alliance assaults coming to the shores of Kultiris and Zandalar, there's going to be new ways to level alts outside of the usual questing route. We've recently improved Island Expedition experience. And so we're seeing characters that are hitting max level through those methods that can end up in slightly awkward situations in terms of what is available to them in the world. Another problem we're looking to solve there is actually flight paths. I think we're currently working on making a BOA book that lets your max level characters learn all the flight paths that you've unlocked on your other characters, so that, again, it's like if you've leveled through Island Expeditions, cool, you just hit 120, you have world quests unlocked on your account, you want to go do a Mythic 0 dungeon, or you want to go do world quests, having to spend 2 or 3 hours just literally riding around the entire world, re-unlocking every flight path, not a super fun experience. It's not an issue if you're leveling naturally through questing, but if you're not, it's something we want to fix. So things like that and more, we're definitely looking to do more to improve the alt experience overall.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you as always.
Q&A. Yeah. Thanks everybody who submitted questions. Hopefully we got answers to some pretty good ones in there.
Yeah.
So.
And for everyone else, we will see you at BlizzCon, where we're going to have a whole lot more to talk about and some exciting news about what's in store for Battle for Azeroth and, of course, WoW Classic.
Yeah, BlizzCon's going to be big, guys. You're definitely going to want to check that out. That's it from us. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Okay, so let me briefly go over how I feel about this whole Q&A. The first thing that I want to bring up is the fact that I really do feel that a lot of people at Blizzard just don't play Protection Warrior. Like the stuff that Ian was saying, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, he's going about like, oh yeah, we want to diversify the tanking toolkit. And I'm like, diversify? You want to diversify? They're like, oh yeah, we understand that, it's a 15%, it's a very small percentage difference between, the tanks that are in the bottom and the tanks that are up. And I'm just like, no. It's not a small percentage at all. It is insane. The advantage that I have when I pop on my Brewmaster Monk is to the point that nobody wants me to play my warrior anymore. Is to the point that Mythic Plus groups will actively not accept warriors. Okay? It's not about players. It's not players that suddenly don't know how to play Protection Warriors. There's always been Protection Warriors in World of Warcraft. It's not the problem. The players are not the problem. You don't get to blame it on the players. You said it yourself. The kit is clunky. You didn't say it by these specific words, but you said, yeah, the kit, it's weird. Yeah, it is weird. It's weird because we got so many friggin' cooldowns that we have to use them all the friggin' time just to survive, which is crazy. It shouldn't be like that on regular trash pulls. It doesn't make any sense. But anyways, the number balancing, it's still not, I don't believe it's going to be enough because according to what I'm here, the feeling that I got from this Q&A is that they're just not aware of how bad they are. Okay, because he's still throwing out like, oh yeah, it's a small little percentage. Players are complaining, but it's just it's not a small thing at all. It is massive. Then the other thing is the contradiction that you have with Azurite gear that just doesn't make any sense to me. The whole point about him saying, oh yeah, but we want there to be friction if you're constantly swapping specs. Well, if you want there to be friction, then why is it that you have these pieces of gear that automatically swap between strength and intellect? I don't understand. What's the logic behind that? These two things contradict each other. Like the current nature of Azurite gear literally contradicts the fact that you have leather pieces that give you intellect and agility. It literally contradicts the fact that you have plate pieces that give you strength and intellect. It doesn't make sense. You either support the hybrid playstyles or you don't. But this whole thing about, oh yeah, it's supposed to be attrition. It's already not going to be optimal. You're already not going to be performing at your best because your secondary stats are going to be tuned towards tanking, or they're going to be tuned towards DPS, which in some classes they might overlap, but ultimately you're already going to get that friction from the simple fact that if you're optimizing your secondary stats appropriately for your spec, and then you swap your spec around, your stats are already not going to be the best. You don't have to punish players by making sure that their traits are also trash. The fact that, and then he goes on to say that, oh yeah, we understand that Mythic Plus is a niche playstyle. And I'm just like, most of my guild loves doing Mythic Plus. We love it. I don't understand why it's a niche. I've done over 20 Mythic Pluses this week alone, and the reset was only a couple of days ago. How does that make sense that it's a niche playstyle? I completely and utterly disagree with Mythic Plus being just a niche that people go in there, they do one Mythic, and they don't do anything else. At least that's definitely not the case in my guild. And then he's just like, yeah, we understand that the fact that you can't get Azurite pieces out of Mythic Plus sucks. We're looking into it. But we're not going to give them to you on the end of run chest. Come on. But at least now I understand why loot doesn't drop in Mythic Plus instance. Now I understand why. Because to them, it's supposed to be an activity that you do, once a week. And then it doesn't make sense because with Warfronts, you can get a loot by AFKing. You don't even put in the effort and you get the loot. I don't understand. I really don't understand. But again, I do want to point out the fact that the reason why I'm so passionate about these problems is because I really am enjoying my time in World of Warcraft right now. There's just problems that really frustrate me, because they're frustrating issues that we have in the game. And they did tackle some of those. They did say, we're going to try to fix some of these tanking differences. We're going to try to fix some of these healing differences. We're going to try to, do something about the Mythic Plus situation, which is really bad. But ultimately, there were no concrete solutions. And the way that they talked about tanking was very disappointing to me, because to me, it looks like they don't know that there's nobody there that is playing the Protection Warrior, the Guardian Druid. There's nobody there playing these classes. Is there not a single person that is doing Mythic Pluses at Blizzard with a Protection Warrior? That's the vibe that I got. But either way, I'm still going to keep playing the game. I'm still going to keep having fun. And also, yeah, one more thing. The whole thing where he said, oh yeah, we understand that there are these problems with tanks, but we can't fix them right now because your raid team has already adapted to the situation as is. And I'm just like, so wait a minute. If you're a Protection Warrior and your raid team just adapted to the fact that they can't take you because you suck, not you as a person, but your class sucks at tanking, it's like, well, wait for the next patch. Or roll an alt like I did. I've never felt, when he said that, I never felt more validated in my choice to roll a monk than I did at that point, which shouldn't be the case. Like after this Q&A, I was expecting to be really insecure about my choice to rolling a monk because I was really hoping, oh, they're going to fix my warrior, you know, which meant that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be spending as much time on the monk. But to be completely honest, after this Q&A, I was just like, nope, I did exactly what I should have done. That was definitely the right thing to do. And I should definitely dedicate everything I got on my monk because they just don't know. They just don't know how bad the situation is right now. Hopefully they'll at least fix the Mythic plus loot. But either way, again, I'm not hating on anything that these two guys have said. I know that I've exaggerated a little bit throughout the video, mostly for the sake of all of us having fun and whatnot, but also because that is the way that I feel about a lot of these issues. But I don't hate them, and I don't want people to send any hate towards them. I know that Josh has already been getting a lot of hate from people, even from content creators, I think. And I don't want to send any hate their way, okay? Just friggin' do your best to fix it because I am enjoying the game, okay? But anyways, the idea of Mythic style Warfront sounds very interesting to me. The raid queue question. I don't know. Maybe. If it's actually challenging and it rewards you with progressive gear, gear that is actually above the 340 threshold, sure. But I don't know. But I was very disappointing with the tanking conversation. Very disappointing. But anyways, that is going to be it for this live stream, you guys. Thank you all very much for showing up. If you guys, those of you watching after the fact, if you're watching the VOD, if you want me to address any particular topic, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. I'm going to be editing down a live stream that I did last night on Twitch to put more content in this channel. I'm going to be putting a couple of bosses that we've done in Heroic, as well as a couple of Mythic plus dungeon runs, so that you guys get to experience that as well, for those of you that are curious about the stuff that I'm doing on World of Warcraft. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all very much for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.